This is Metro Week. Our top story, homelessness in Tucson. We'll get an update on the city's efforts to house all veterans in need of shelter by the end of the year. Then we'll ask how nonprofits are working on a longer-term goal to end all homelessness here. Plus, our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. In 2013, Tucson accepted a challenge from the federal government to be one of 25 cities in the nation to end veterans' homelessness by the end of this year. Here's a look at the progress so far. When the initiative started, Tucson counted 353 homeless veterans, but was expecting to house through the years about 1,200. That was going to require a pace of finding housing for about 53 people a month. Tucson Mayor Jonathan Rothschild says more than 900 previously homeless veterans now have a place to live. Tucson expects it will have housed a total of 1,500 homeless veterans once it reaches its goal.
We're going to really put emphasis for the next 6 or 7 months on getting those extra 600 or 7 people housed. Now, that's a number. The real idea of this is to hit that number, but it's also through hitting that number to create an infrastructure that as other people fall into homelessness, we can address them more rapidly. And we're doing that with our homeless management information system, we're doing that with our VA vouchers, and we're doing that with bringing coordination together from the providers that provide to the homeless in the community. So we're getting there, the infrastructure. Now it's just a question of hitting the number. Sink or swim doesn't work.
The city is not focused just on housing people who are already homeless. Rothschild says at the same time as homeless services become better coordinated, it's time to put prevention programs in place. He recently announced a program that will put AmeriCorps volunteers in schools to connect high school graduates with training, jobs, or military recruiters.
In the schools that have been identified, we're looking at 75% Title I students. In other words, 75% of the students are below the poverty and eligible for federal food assistance. So what we've tried to do is focus on those schools where we find the highest concentrations of poverty. So again, if we can get these students through high school and on to the next level, what we've learned is that is the best way of getting a person out of poverty.
For more specifics on the plan to end veterans' homelessness in Tucson by the end of the year, I interviewed Jody Frederick of the Southern Arizona VA. She manages its homeless outreach program. So a few years ago, Tucson was selected as one of 25 cities in the country with a target goal to end veterans' homelessness by the end of 2015. Why was Tucson selected as part of that group?
They selected 25 cities based on the amount of homeless population that was in the cities, and Tucson happened to be one that had a large number of homeless people.
How do you do this? What's the process for getting those veterans into housing, homeless veterans into housing?
For the VA, usually what happens is they'll come in through our door and they'll ask for assistance, and then we'll do an assessment on them to see what kind of needs that they have, housing, and as far as other needs to education, mental health issues, just whatever. We have different types of housing, so it depends on the assessment where we will refer them to. We have transitional housing, which is up for 2 years that they can stay in there, and they learn basic life skills, employment skills, so that when they leave there, they're ready to live independently, which is the goal. We also have HUD-VASH, which is a partnership with HUD and the VA, and those are vouchers that are considered permanent housing. So that's our goal too, to get those veterans into permanent housing so that they're able to stay there as long as they want.
So the model is housing first, right? That's
Housing
the approach.
first.
Why is that the model that we're using in Tucson at this point?
Well, pretty much throughout the VA in the 25 cities we're using that, because it used to be that you would want the veteran or whoever to get sober first, to do this, to do that before we're going to put you in housing. Housing first is just the opposite. Let's get you housed and then you can work on whatever issues you have, which makes sense because if you're living on the street, there's no way you can deal with other issues. So you take care of the basic needs first. There's very little expectation with Housing First other than we provide case management and try to work with them on whatever issues that they have. it's their choice to work, on them or not work on them.
And then you mentioned the vouchers that are used to help pay for this housing. Explain how those work.
Well, those, like I said, those are through HUD, similar to Section 8, and they provide the vouchers, and then the VA provides the case management. So we work in collaboration and just work as a partner.
So the money's coming from, you're mentioning HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Department of the federal government, comes from HUD to the voucher that essentially goes to a person who needs housing. Is it a straight pipeline to, say, the rent? Pay straight into the rent, or how does it work?
The money goes to Public Housing Authority, and then the veteran, when they receive a voucher, then if they have income, they'll pay 30% of their income, and the voucher picks up the rest.
Is there a time limit on that? How long the vouchers last? Are they 1 year? Or
they are forever. So if it gets to the point where the veteran no longer needs case management and they're functioning, fully on their own, then they can switch over to a Section 8, which would be just straight, without the VA involved, providing there's a Section 8 voucher available. And if there's not one available, then they'll stay with the VA's voucher until one does come available. But it's permanent. They can stay as long as they want.
Encapsulate the issue of veterans' homelessness in Tucson for us. Is this something that, before this initiative, this 25 Cities initiative to end veterans' homelessness here, was it getting worse? Was it stabilized? What were we seeing in trends?
I would say probably, I don't know if I want to say it's getting worse, but what we have found, for instance, the age limit, or the age that comes into us, the average age is about 54. So I think what we've found is there are a lot of veterans out there that have been homeless for years and years and years, and that people may not be aware of because they're not all downtown on the streets. A lot of them will be out in the desert, and unless you know where they are living, you would never find them. So it's been ongoing, I think, for a long time. It's getting better, and we still have a ways to go.
How do you go about identifying the homeless veterans in Tucson before you even get to the housing part?
A lot of them will come in, like I said, through walk-in, because word of mouth, they'll know that we provide services. One of the things that we provide at our walk-in clinic is they can get showers there, they can get laundry there, they can get food bags. We actually have a couple barbers that volunteer their time so they can get haircuts. We have a clothing room where they can pick up clothing. And so that's the way that we get them to engage them until they decide that they are ready for housing. There are some that aren't particularly wanting housing at the time, and so we continue to work with them. We have a walk-in medical center where they can go and see. We have a nurse practitioner and an LPN that they can see as soon as they come in. And a lot of them have neglected medical care, so we can usually get them in and help take care of whatever medical needs they have. So that's kind of how we get them engaged. And we also go out in the community. We do outreach, we go to Salvation Army, the other shelters, and just look for them.
How will you know when you've achieved this goal? How will you know when you've housed all the homeless veterans in Tucson?
That's a good question. We do a point-in-time count, the whole community does every year, and that gives us an idea of how many homeless veterans we have, but that's just the veterans that we find. So there's veterans out there that obviously we haven't found. So I guess one of the ways we look at it is when our point-in-time count goes down to 0, then we can consider that fairly successful.
Do you think it's realistic to achieve that by the end of the year as the goal of this initiative sets?
I think it will take longer than that. As a matter of fact, I think that they're looking now at maybe making it 2016 because it's a huge accomplishment or a venture to try. But I think as long as we keep trying and we keep housing people, then we're being successful.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
I also spoke with Tom Litwicki, who is chairman of the board for the Tucson-Pima Collaboration to End Homelessness. He's also CEO of the Old Pueblo Community Group, one of the nonprofits working to end all homelessness in Tucson by January 2017. The veterans picture is just one piece of the whole of homelessness in Tucson. How does it fit that big picture?
Well, the big picture of homelessness in Tucson is a significant number of people who are either living on the streets, in the washes, the deserts, are in emergency shelter, in transitional housing and permanent supportive housing and different housing programs. On average, one of our biggest challenges has been in Tucson is that our homelessness is about twice the national average. So about 1 in every 131 individuals in Tucson will be homeless over a year's period. So it's a real challenge to try and get people into appropriate housing and to try and keep them in appropriate housing.
What is the overall goal for ending or reducing homelessness in Tucson? What are some of the points that you're aiming for?
Well, the overall goal is to have the number of individuals who are entering into homelessness at any month be the same number as the placements into housing every month, which essentially means that no one should be in emergency shelter or in a homeless condition for more than 30 days, because the number in and the number into homelessness and the number into shelter or into housing is the same.
Would that be called short-term homelessness then?
Yes, so that would be short-term homelessness. What we're really trying to grapple with is the long-term chronic homelessness that's been out there for a number of years. The average person who's been chronically homeless has been homeless for 7 to 8 years. So the challenge is to help somebody get out of homelessness who has been in that condition for a long period of time as rapidly as possible. And then once we accomplish that, to be able to then go back and say, okay, now how do we prevent people from getting into long-term homelessness?
The veterans, housing a veteran is paid for with a federal voucher. How do you get funding to house somebody who's not been in the military?
We still use federal vouchers. We have federal funding that comes through a continuum of care here in Tucson. And basically our role then as a board of directors is to determine who gets what funding throughout the number of agencies and government entities throughout Pima County and how that funding is dispersed. Some of it is transitional housing, so it's programs that people could go to and live at for fixed periods of time. And some of it is emergency shelter, which is a short-term solution. And some of it is rapid rehousing to get people who are about to be evicted or just got evicted back into housing. And then some of it is permanent housing, which is what we think of as in the vouchers, where people have a lease and they have their own housing. Typically, what we're finding is that this large portion of folks who've been chronically homeless do best in permanent supportive housing. So they actually do best in what we call a housing first model. That's probably one of the biggest challenges to our system, is that we haven't had a model in which housing was given first and then services were offered to help with serious mental illness, to help with addictions. Instead, we traditionally tried to work with the addictions and the mental health services, and when those were improved, then we would put someone into permanent housing. And more research has found that that's actually kind of an opposite method. So right now we're kind of trying to turn that system around to where we provide the housing first.
So housing first, then maybe some mental or physical health needs are resolved after that. What else is necessary for the Tucson community to achieve this goal?
Well, probably the first thing that's necessary is to get a real better idea of who's homeless is in Tucson. We do currently a point-in-time count, one time a year, and we count everyone who's in housing programs of some sort and everyone who we can find on the streets. The challenge is that there isn't a real scientific method to identifying the folks who are in the community. So it's quite likely that count is an undercount. So we're not sure exactly how many people are homeless. Improving that method and the process in which we do that count would be helpful for starters, because then we'd actually know what the numbers really are. Today we have numbers, but we assume they're actually higher. The next thing that we'll have to do is to coordinate our entry into services based on need. Right now, folks may enter into services through any of the community agencies. We're in the process of putting together a coordinated entry system in which all agencies would use the same screening tool. It's a validated vulnerability index, and that gets put into a management system with the county, and then the persons who are highest on that list in vulnerability go into housing first. So it kind of takes the responsibility of identifying and placing folks in housing on the community and not on the individual agency. Hopefully that will help us to be able to get the most vulnerable off the streets first. The last part of that then is going to be to trying to do this housing first, to try and keep people in housing and to work with people when they are in housing. A significant portion of folks who we currently have in chronic homelessness on the streets have serious mental illness. They have serious conditions that they've had for many years. Family have passed away that used to care for them, and now they're living on the streets. We're going to probably need sustained and continued services.
Hello, I'm Christopher Conover. Next on Arizona Week, we'll take you to the Arizona Schools for the Deaf and Blind.
It's neat because you know that they're going to walk away from this experience having just a little bit more understanding of another culture.
Now our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me in the studio this week are Astrid Galvan of the Associated Press, Dylan Smith of the Tucson Sentinel, and my colleague Fernanda Echavarri of Arizona Public Media. Thanks you all for coming in this week. Astrid, last time we had you in, you talked about the controversial homeless encampment downtown, and it was just about at an ending point. Where did all of those people end up when the city said they could no longer live downtown in boxes?
They pretty much split up. There's one group that's at kind of an illegal camp off of I-10 around Speedway. And there's another group that's at the emergency shelter that the city funded at a church. But that expires in June, so it's kind of unclear where some of those people are going to go. After
the money, it's a financial reason that it's a temporary situation?
Right.
Okay. And one of our interviewees said that one of the issues with homelessness in Tucson is that a lot of the organizations are not connected, that the service organizations are not talking to each other or using each other as resources. What did you find in your reporting regarding how those organizations work together or don't?
Yeah, I think that there's kind of a new effort to make that happen, and I think a lot of city and county leaders are trying to make that happen because you're right, there has been that comment that these organizations kind of worked on their own and didn't really come together. And you saw the day that the protesters were actually moving out of the park downtown, there were just all these different resources, all these different organizations there, and I think that might have been, one of the few times that you have everybody kind of in one place working on the same thing.
But at the same time, you might have had a few people offering the same services and then a service that wasn't offered at the time. So coordination could help make sure everything's available at every place, potentially.
Right.
And Fernanda, you recently went to an event where homeless people were offered several services from different community organizations. Can you tell us about what you covered there?
Yes, the event is called Tucson Homeless Connect, and it happens twice a year. And it's a place, it's sort of like a one-stop shop where people can, in the mornings they get breakfast, they can get dental care, medical care. There's a judge there that can help them deal with any kind of legal issues. They give them rides to and from the DMV to get IDs and then to the Social Security office. There's one of the services that's really popular, and it's getting a haircut, which to a lot of us may seem like something kind of not so important, but for a lot of these people, it was really important to be able to look a little bit cleaner and to have their beards trimmed and their hair cut. It's not something that they can do otherwise.
Who was providing those services?
The haircut services, it's actually beauty school students from Tucson College of Beauty. And we interviewed a couple of them, and you actually get to hear them say how great they feel to be able to show up and get some of their sort of practice hours. Because when we were there for maybe 3 hours and dozens of people were coming in and out. It's a very popular service. So it was students from the Tucson College of Beauty.
So they're also learning their craft as they go.
They are, yes.
What are some of the personal stories that you heard while you were there?
I have to say, I think a lot of times we think of the homeless population as sort of maybe the middle-aged man or mostly men. I saw a lot of women coming in and out of there. I spoke with a couple of what I could, they didn't want to give me their age, but they look like 17, 18, 19-year-old young men. And I remember this one particular man, his name is Tracy. He had not trimmed his beard or cut his hair since he had open heart surgery in 2013. And he talked about, as he was getting his hair done and his beard trim, he talked about how his self-confidence was already boosting being there and how it was a new beginning for him.
So much of the focus on the homeless problem of late has been on veteran homelessness, and that's where the city's put a lot of their effort into tackling it. Is the mayor correct when he says that there's some infrastructure being created there where we can build upon to deal with other people, help other people who are homeless? And really, how big of a problem is it in Tucson? How extensive is it?
I think that I can't speak directly for what the mayor is talking about, but I know that I actually recently, a while back, I did a story on homeless people, just homelessness in general, and that the number of homeless people who are seeking services has gone down, and some of the people who work with that community say that because some of that rapid housing is actually getting a lot of people off the streets and into housing, whether that's veterans or not, I'm not sure, but it is helping get some people off the street.
And that has always been the goal. When Tucson started its focus on veterans homelessness, it wanted to build the services that everybody else could use. And the numbers are actually lower, how many people they have to house per month to get all the homeless people that the city has counted into housing by the January 2017 deadline. So I just want to track back to one thing with you, Fernanda. We mentioned that you covered this event, but it hasn't actually aired yet. When will people be able to see that?
We're going to air that story next month in our other show. It's more of a feature story on Arizona Illustrated next month.
Okay, so that'll be on our website as well. Dylan, I want to switch to another topic. It's still a financial question, and that is the county voted this week to send a bond election, a series of bond questions on whether the county should borrow some money to voters on the November ballot. Tell us what happened.
The Board of Supervisors is put on the ballot a package that's an $815 million in total that's broken up into a number of different things that we're going to be voting on for open space and conservation, to build some parks and rec, public housing, money for tourism and economic development, and funding for libraries, and a whole, pretty much a grab bag of different packages that they think we need to invest quite a bit of money in. But over the past about 20 years, they've sent about, I think, $1.5 billion in bonds to voters, and voters have always okayed them. So this doesn't seem like a very risky move on the part of the county to put this before voters, and that we always end up saying yes somehow. But there is always controversy about how much Pima County is carrying for its debt load.
And we should just say that that $1.5 billion figure was in several different elections.
There was one that was $700 million, another that was $700 million. Was that last year for the animal shelter? A much smaller figure.
That was like $22 million in that one. There was about 100 people signed up to speak at that meeting, but the room was overcrowded. There was an overflow viewing area for people. How did the opinions fall? Who was there opposed and in favor of this?
Most of the people who signed up to speak and spent a pretty long time waiting to do so were very much in favor. People from community organizations that have long been involved with this. There were, anytime you're talking about the government spending money, there are people who are opposed, including some of the folks who were on the bond committee for the years that it took to review all these projects and winnow down what started as a much, much larger list of potential projects.
Is there one particular project that stands out, kind of a big thing that they're wanting to do with this specific bond package?
It's, really all over the county, a whole number of different packages. One of the biggest chunks is $200 million towards road construction and road maintenance. So, going around for the roads that are the county's responsibility and taking care of more of those.
Now, these are a lot for very specific projects as opposed to, say, broad societal topics. Did you see any money for anything that would affect homeless people?
There were some funding for workforce training, and some of that would certainly affect people who are living in poverty and perhaps some of the homeless folks. And also there was money, part of that area of the bond is for services at libraries to give people a leg up.
And libraries have turned into more like community centers in the last few years, not just places where people check out books, but places where some of those events, as Fernanda covered, might be held, or a lot more broad scale.
Yeah.
Now, this is also a city election year, Dylan, so the November ballot for people who live within city limits has some city council members on it. Is there any predictions about how a $815 million county bond proposal could affect city council election turnout?
Generally, the folks who live in the city of Tucson vote more in favor for the bonds being a little bit more liberal, a little bit more democratic than the county as a whole, compared to people who do not live in the city. So as far as a strategy for the county to get this approved, for County Administrator Chuck Huckleberry, who does not like to lose to get this through. It makes sense for them to put it on a city election where it's more likely to go through than if it were in a different election cycle. One of the things that complicates it and also complicates the city moving ahead with some of the charter changes that have been recommended by a committee is the fact that there's going to be a pay raise for mayor and council on this ballot coming up, something that is sort of required. A citizens committee recommended that we bump their pay up a little bit, so the city council is bound to put this before voters for a yes or a no. They can't raise their own salaries. We have to vote to do that. So that kind of, that's the sort of thing that always gets voted down. We always say no to that, and even though we always end up having to end up voting on it. So that might complicate a little bit of what's going on with the charter changes for the city wanting to change up how it can raise money, especially.
So one of those financial questions might affect the other. In which direction, we don't know yet.
It kind of depends on how the rhetoric ends up playing out, whether the folks who are in favor of these things convince voters that these are solid investments and that are not going to cost a whole lot of money. The impact for the average homeowner for the county bonds will be $55 or $60 a year for quite a long time, of course.
Now, we've got about 4 minutes left, and I want to switch topics from our municipal to a broader scale, something that we've talked a lot about at this table with you, Fernanda, over the last year, and that is immigration. You're our immigration reporter here at Arizona Public Media. You and Astrid went to a forum recently on immigration, and it drew protesters. So let me have you first start by talking about what the event was.
This was an event that Congressman Raul Grijalva put together, and he brought in Democratic Congressman Luis Gutierrez from Illinois. And the goal of the event from Grijalva's perspective was, let's remind people that although President Obama's executive actions on immigration are on hold because they're in court, that people should be, he wanted to have lawyers on the panel and sort of get people ready for when these programs are available so they could get what they need, and also to kind of put the issue back in the front burner because it hasn't gotten as much public attention as it did when the president first released his plan. And I think, and Astrid, I think you can agree with me, it had been a little while since I went to an immigration event that got as heated as this, to the point of having to have campus police escort one of the protesters out of the building. This was at Pima Community College's West Campus, so it was an auditorium and it was campus police. But it's been a while since I saw that kind of tension between anti-immigration and pro-immigration groups in one room.
Yeah, I mean, the last time I saw something like that was in Oracle, when there were the protesters that thought the children were going to come in and they were trying to block the buses, and that was one of the more heated situations that I've seen. But this one in particular, which was last Friday, I believe, a lot of yelling. Even outside after the event, there were a couple people yelling so much that I thought they were going to get into a physical fight.
Wow, and that surprises me because I do agree with you. I feel like it's been a long time since we heard that tensions escalated to that point during public events. Dylan?
One of the interesting things about this event was you had people who are very active, very vocal on both sides, sitting right next to each other in the auditorium. People who would ordinarily probably avoid speaking to each other. A lot of them were sitting,
very close quarters. Very close.
Directly next to each other. And, in that kind of situation, it's no surprise that things get a little amped up.
And it seemed like the protesters was a group. I mean, the members of the group knew each other. They talked before, they talked after. But they were sort of sprinkled throughout the auditorium. So that also was interesting. You had them in different parts of the auditorium. And like you said, very close quarters. Some of the arguments that happened from this seat to the seat in front of them, which I think added to the tension in the room.
Astrid, can you talk a little bit about the tone of the event outside of just the protest station? Was it simply information only? Did it change through the course of the evening with this stuff happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started as simply information, and then it just got very heated, and members of the audience were yelling either for or against immigration, and even at the end, there was palpable tension, like I said, almost a physical altercation between two people. So yeah, it just took I think a different turn than we expected.
Did it seem like there were security expecting this at the event, or was it kind of an impromptu, let's get these people out of here?
There was an event there was something posted on Facebook that said people were planning to protest, and there were a couple hundred people that said they would attend. Obviously not that many went, but I think as far as the event organizers went, they expected something and they prepared for it.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. I want to thank all three of you for coming in. Before we go, we want to remind you you can find all the stories we produce at Arizona Public Media on our website, including those that aired on our other TV shows and on the radio on NPR 89.1. Next, Arizona Week visits the Arizona Schools for the Deaf and the Blind.